But I mean, going back, you talked about nukes, and I remember this 2 weeks ago. Now they're on Fox. Now they have the government saying we may have to nuke, we may have to drill in and do this. What did your sources say about nukes?
My source was scared to death. He said to me, he said, Chaplain, the only way that I can see to stop this is a nuclear device. And he said, but, and I could hear the fear in his voice. He said, a nuke, because of the strata that BP has drilled into, which nobody probably has ever drilled into before. And he said, because of the extreme pressure that's already there and what has happened to that pipe, he said, to put a nuke in there would take months in the first place, because he said we've got to angle drill in order to get down to it, to be able to do it. He said, Chaplain, the thing that frightens me so much is that if we use a nuke, that we might succeed. And he said, hopefully we can. But he said, if we don't, he said, we crack that strata further, and it will never be stopped, and it will flow like this and even more forever. And he said, that frightens me.
All right, let me bring this up. And I looked it up. Vanadium is a chemical element with the symbol V, an atomic number 23. It is a soft, silver gray, ductile transition metal. The formation of the oxide layer stabilizes the metal against oxidation. And it says it was discovered in 1801. And the report I've got here is, and this is an email, we have to look into this, this is unconfirmed, only taking Gulf Coast calls. 2 nights ago, my friend, who works for a consultant with a toxicologist that works for the EPA, showed my friend and I a private memo from a top EPA official asking all consultants and researchers to pull up as much scientific information on vanadium. Apparently, they are reporting extremely high levels of vanadium because they're drilling so deep, folks, and upper management is getting upset because they do not have any valid research information on exposure of vanadium in the Gulf. Previously, there's been a small study done in 2006 that measures small amounts of vanadium being released. Vanadium is highly toxic. Please report on this. You might get EPA consultant to call in. My friend will not give me the document. Guys, do a search, because I bet some of this is leaked. Vanadium being released in the Gulf. Lindsey Williams, did you hear anything about vanadium?
No, vanadium was not mentioned in any of my conversations, but, Alex, the way that this thing is progressing so rapidly from day to day, I will probably be making updates weekly on this as I contact my sources in what's happening, and I will be glad to ask them about vanadium.
And I'm glad to hear you're also putting together an emergency DVD report that we'll talk about in the next segment. I want to jam in a few more calls, but you'll be with us for 30 minutes into the next hour, and we'll do that same procedure from yesterday, but this time we'll take your calls where I give out the number here at my office for those that are patiently holding, so you can be with us in the overdrive. The only way to listen there will be Infowars.com on the audio streams and PrisonPlanet.tv for PrisonPlanet.tv members. Let's go ahead and talk to, we got a bunch of calls here. In fact, we've got an anonymous caller here who says he was a contractor for BP during this thing. He says he's seen all kinds of insanity. Which caller is that? Which caller is anonymous in L.A.? Or I guess that's Louisiana? Genesis, which caller is that? I just call them number 2. Okay, sure. Anonymous, that's fine. We can just make one up. I mean, I've got to know what line they're on to be able to say go to them. Yeah, let's go to that anonymous caller. Anonymous caller, you're on the air. Is it Los Angeles or Louisiana you're calling in from?
I was in Louisiana.
Okay, what did you see?
Okay, the information may not be as good as what you just had there, but I can just tell you some of the things that I saw. I know that they have the timeline for the explosion, and I know that the first name that was up on there was work being done by Halliburton. Within 20 hours after they were injecting minerals into the well, they almost immediately started having gas problems, and it was within 20 hours later that the explosion occurred. And as it was explained to me by people who do this for a living, they said that they have standard procedures for venting and handling of all of this, and it was the first time ever in history that all 3 safety measures failed. And that was, although I'm not the one who does this for a living, that was what was explained to me by the people who do it for a living. So
you're a separate contractor that was working in and around this?
Yes.
But that sounds like that meshes with what Lindsey's saying. We had a petroleum geologist earlier on who said, yes, it looks like mega record pressure. I mean, what's a normal high pressure well, Lindsey Williams?
Crude oil came up at 1,500 pounds per square inch, and they considered that to be a pretty good oil pressure. To get 20 to 70,000 pounds per square inch would blow anything that any oil company or any human being has ever developed on the face of the earth.
Okay, and my involvement on that end of things was it was more towards the cleanup end of things. And just to give a couple of examples of some of the things I saw, I know they were ready to deploy about 25,000 linear feet of boom. The National Guard came and said, no, we have to count it. And they moved it from boat to boat. And 5 days in which that boom could have been deployed. They came back, and after 5 days, that boom could have been completely deployed. Instead, they sat and counted it, and then they brought it back after moving it from boat to boat.
Yeah, it's like weird. It's like New Orleans. They said, we got all this food and water stacked up. You can't have it, and you can't walk out over the highway or we're going to machine gun you. We're government. We're God. What else did you see?
Well, I do know that another explanation I had was the oil could have been hit almost.
Stay there. We are into hour number overdrive, into our 5th hour today. I did 5 hours and 15 minutes yesterday. We're only going to do about 30 more today and take a few of the callers that are left over from the live transmission that's on the AM and FM, XM, everything else. Pastor Lindsey Williams with his inside intel with his former Big Three oil company executive has given him so many key insights before. Lindsey, you went over the fact that they are looking at using a nuke, the fact that you're saying it's 20,000 to 70,000 pressure, that they went into some type of magma chamber, volcano. I mean, they're drilling down to the ends of the crust, close to the mantle, and we know they have these batholiths and other things that are forming. So very, very serious. And we're seeing this kind of being dribbled out now. We've seen the propaganda of, oh, they've fixed the leak over and over again to give false hope. And, oh, there's only a few thousand gallons, then 50,000, then 100,000, then 200,000. Now they say it's 500,000. Now they're saying they're underestimating that. You're saying your oil company sources are saying, what, 4 to 5 million gallons a day?
Yes, but I'm quite sure that they were being very conservative because they knew I was going to quote them. And so you can put it very much above that.
Okay, so let's run through recapping what you've already broke and the other news you didn't have the time to get to while I was taking calls.
Okay, first of all, I want to touch on a subject that you just casually mentioned at the beginning of your program. You said that Goldman Sachs sold much of their BP stock only a few days just prior to the Gulf oil gusher, and that BP's president sold 1/3 of his stocks just prior to the
BP
gusher.
sold 44%. He sold 1/3. Turns out the Goldman Sachs chairman of International was also the chairman of BP, but got out a month before.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this because it gives me an opportunity to say it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have dared do it. I lived with these people for 3 years. The average person has not the slightest idea as to the mindset of the elite. I have written 3 books attempting to tell people how these people think. The elite are a part of the occult. Are you catching me, folks? Now, keep in mind, I've been a minister of the gospel, the Bible, for 50 years. I lived with these elite for 3 years. They are a part of the occult. You wonder why did Goldman Sachs sell this stock so many days ahead of time? Their occultish connections told them to. You've got to understand that we're dealing with a spiritual warfare here that is so far beyond the imagination of the average person that unless you lived with them, you couldn't understand why BP president would sell this amount of stock. It wasn't that he knew this thing was going to blow. It's that his occultic connections, and Alex, you have even made a video on the occult. I know it was You went out to California and
yeah, Bohemian Grove. I mean, it's even admitted that
it was marvelous. These people are a part of the occult, and as a result, they knew in advance what to do, not because they knew this thing was going to blow, but because their occultic connections had told them so.
Well, the word is, and I'm not into the occult, but I've had people that are into astrology, well-known businessmen here in Austin, I'm not going to say names, that have visited me saying that, you know, there's going to be catastrophe in the next few months, and this was before the spill, and there's going to be all this stuff happening, and it's going to get worse and worse going into to July because, you know, the astrology says it. And I know that Ronald Reagan made every decision he did, down to the minute of a speech, to the color of his tie, off of his astrologer. And I'm not bashing Ronald Reagan, because when you go to mainstream news about Tony Blair, he goes all over the world doing these rituals. Every morning he's possessed by something called the spirit of the light and flops around on the ground.